In this episode, we'll remove the stock ECU from the Evo 8, create a patch harness so that we could utilize the OEM connectors, install a new MaxxECU standalone, and get the Evo running again. Alright, so before we get started, I know you guys are probably asking, why am I making the jump to a standalone ECU? The Evo ECU is perfectly capable, and you're right, it is. It's a amazing feat that people have decoded all the instructions and been able to do pretty much anything that you could throw at it. But at this stage in the game, I feel like I'm just a better and more confident and efficient tuner when I'm working with a standalone. Working with MaxxECU and Haltech, I just feel a lot more confident in my capabilities and the software itself, as well as being able to live tune and not have to shut off the car, that type of thing. I also have mods planned for this car that are definitely going to affect the drivability, like E85 and cams. I just have better techniques, in my opinion, when I'm working with those standalones that give me a lot more power. I'm super pumped with the MaxxECU and the S4, so I'm excited to be working with one again. Let's go over it real quick, and then we'll go over our plan of attack. The MaxxECU Street is perfect for me. Not only am I already familiar with the software, but it could do all the basics that I need. It can control up to 6 cylinders sequentially or 12 in wasted spark. It's got boost control, shift cut, flex fuel support, built-in lambda control, launch control, anti-lag. You could set up a ton of warning features as well as user-defined functions, and it's super affordable. So to remove the ECU, what we're going to do is remove the glove box by pushing this tab down. Then once that side is off, we could slide it to the left and pull it out completely. So you can see our ECU right here. The wires are coming in from the bottom. So we're going to take off this plastic cover, and then we'll remove our 4 connectors, and then remove these 3 10mm bolts holding the ECU in. And here is the OEM ECU removed. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to retrofit this bracket onto this ECU, but we won't worry about that yet. Let's jump to the next item. Up next, we're going to be removing our MAF and probably have to get some sort of adapter to get this filter on here. We'll also remove this recirc line, and we'll remove this intercooler pipe to get ready to drill our new IAT sensor in. Alright, so we're going to let that dry, and in the meantime we're going to install this new O2 gauge. So this is supplied from MaxxECU. It's a Scylla 4.2 LSU sensor from Bosch, which is currently what I have in the car with the MTXL. But instead of the gauge driving the power and heat and all of that, the ECU is. So we're going to rip that out and swap this one in, and then wire it in as well. So here is how we're looking. We have our harness chopped right here. This is where we're going to make our patch part that goes to the stock ECU header. And then we have a few lines that we need to run through into the engine bay. Anytime I'm hooking up a new ECU or configuring anything related to the ignition coils, I always disconnect them. Just a habit, you don't want to accidentally burn them up. So we'll do that, and then we'll get everything installed in the car. All right, now we have our wires coming from our ECU as well as our vacuum line. So we just have to hook everything up and finalize the connectors on here. So we're gonna have to pin those and route them to their proper places. Alright, so here is the finalized engine bay. We no longer have our MAF, we just have a little coupler right here that adapts to this new filter. We have the block off for the recirc from the diverter valve, which is now vented to atmosphere. That's also hooked up over there. We had to run a new vacuum line, and we have our IAT and all of our new wires coming into the bay, so we still have one more to go for the 85 sensor, but yeah, this should be good to go under the hood. So after yanking the MTXL, I did need a gauge that could display the output from the lambda sensor. I decided to get the Gauge Art CAN bus gauge because it allows me to display 4 sensors at once, and it's super easy to hook up. It's just power, ground, CAN high and CAN low from the ECU. It's also really easy to set up and configure. I love it. So now that we have everything installed, it's time to work on the ECU and do our initial configuration. Alright, so we'll start by opening our MTune software, and we'll do our basic configurations. So mainly setting up the engine size, how many pistons, and the firing order. Next, I like to just verify which channels I'll log by default. The MaxxECU by default will start off logging anytime it's turned on, which is pretty nifty, and it'll just rotate once it runs out of space. And this is where we'll set up all of our limit. For example, our rev limiter, our boost cut, I always like to keep it at a wastegate level value, so probably around 1 bar or so. Here I'm setting up a power cut in case my lambda value goes too lean. So just one of the many protections you could set up here. For the initial tune, like I said, I wanted to keep it at about 120 kPa of positive boost. I also want to set up some additional warnings in terms of if my actual lambda differentiates from my target, just some basic warnings here. Under the fuel general, you'll set up your injectors, so your size as well as dead times. You'll get those from the manufacturer. Here I'm setting my 1120cc FIC injectors. Under the startup ASE tab, or after start enrichment, this is where you're really going to spend some time when you do your cold starts. You could also set up some fuel trims based on the IAT values as well as coolant. For acceleration enrichment, you'll definitely want to hold off on this until your general fuel table is solid. We'll also want to turn off our closed loop lambda control, again until our general fuel table is solid. In this tab we have our basic ignition settings, so basically our dwell times as well as any corrections. I'm running the same wasted spark setup as OEM. In the future I wouldn't mind switching to sequential. So in my case I am actually going to remove the idle air control valve from the OEM Evo. I'm just going to go with idle ignition control. I have had really good luck with it on the S4, so why not simplify here too? In the trigger and home section, that's pretty much setting up the output from your crank and cam sensor. It's so the ECU can calculate the RPM as well as which stroke for TDC. The only real thing to note here is the trigger offset. You'll want to verify this number when setting up the base ignition timing. In the sensor section, you'll basically set your resistance tables for your sensors. For the GM IAT sensor, there's one already provided. For the Mitsubishi coolant sensor, I found this table online. And we'll also double check that our lambda controller is on. We'll be using our digital input 1 for our flex fuel sensor, and our digital input 2 is the output from our AC request button. So basically when we want our AC to turn on. Here's our output section. We're pretty much driving the tachometer, the AC magnetic clutch, which also triggers the AC fan relay. We also have our fuel pump, our lambda sensor heater, as well as our fan controller, and I'm also setting up an evap. For our boost duty, I'm just zeroing everything out so that we're essentially running on our wastegate spring only. And here's the table for our fan controller. It is a pulse width modulated output, so we can pretty much set the duty depending on the coolant temperature and RPM. And our final output is our AC. This pretty much just sets the parameters for when it could turn on. M-Tune software also has some really helpful features like a trigger oscilloscope and logger. And here are our main fuel and ignition tables. For the fuel, I find that about 50 VE is good enough to get the car started. You probably still have to modulate the throttle, but overall this should get you pretty close. At this point, I like to test out all my outputs. So for example, my boost solenoid as well as my fuel pump. I also like to do my injectors and ignition coils. It's just always good to make sure that your wiring is correct before you proceed. And that's pretty much it. Now that we have our ECU configured and we know that our wiring is good, we could start this thing up. And like I said, pretty much 50% VE is good enough to get the car started. You could pretty much make block changes at this point. You might have to modulate the throttle just a little bit, but around 50 should get you started. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is verify the base ignition timing, and all that's doing is basically making sure that what the ECU thinks, for example, is 10 degrees before top dead center is actually 10 degrees top dead center mechanically. So what we'll do is lock the ignition timing on the ECU, and then we'll use our timing light and make sure that the crank is at TDC at the 10 degree before top dead center mark on the cover. So it's kind of annoying to do on the Evo because there's not much space here, but what we are going to do is remove the coolant bottle, put it over here, and also kind of just tuck the power steering fluid reservoir out of the way as well. Alright, so it's not going to really be visible on camera, but if you get a flashlight in between these lines, you could just see the marks over here adjacent to the pulley. So what I'm going to do is just get the car started, get the timing light hooked up, and lock the time in, and we'll see how it does. And we're good. It always blows my mind on how relatively easy it is to get a car started on a completely new setup. I am very happy right now. I also am playing around with the CAN gauge and I love it as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want some further tuning videos or anything broken down even further. Peace out.